Everything that you are listening to, and it's time to give you a tip of what we'll be largely focusing on in the next hour. Boy child, boy child, boy child. But why the boy child today?
You know why I'm laughing? It's because this is a question that should have been asked several years ago, and I'm glad that we are getting to ask it now. When you go to most of the prisons, there will be more men than there are women. And every man today was once a boy. And every boy today is going to be a man. And any unfocused, undisciplined boy ends up in prison, ends up on the streets, or ends up in the grave, or ends up useless, because the world will not pay attention to that. And this is a world of value. If you're not creating value in the kind of skill set, but also in the way you treat people, in the way you live your life, the world doesn't have space for you. So we see increasing rates of crime, and most of these are from, the boys. You also see that the mental breakdown, just do statistics of people that have mental illnesses, majority are male. When you also look at the number of people who are in substance abuse, people who are smoking, who are drinking, who are eating a lot of maybe mairungi, majority are men. You'll also look at the number of people, the number of men who are depressed and hopelessness, even suicide rates are higher among men. And many times we may look at these as problems, but I look at these as symptoms. And I think one of the conversations today should be on how did we arrive at this level. And so after that, that gives us a good diagnosis, and based on that, like medical people say, we can then do the right prescription. Yes.
So that means at the end of the day, we intend to literally be able to change the perception around raising boys, right? And make sure that we have responsible boys growing up who can make responsible men. But just before we go to that discussion in the next hour, from the look of things on the ground, specifically taking West Nile as a case study, what is it like? How do you find the way we are raising our boys? Is it normal, or is something that is missing?
Okay. I think something that could have been right 20, 30 years ago, but may not be right today. Why? Because times are changing. 20 years ago, fathers didn't have to do so much to speak to their children and all this. Why? Because there were not so many opposing voices. And then most of the fathers 30, 40 years ago were staying home. So there was not a lot of movement. And these boys had enough opportunity to see the lives of their fathers and copy a lot of things. And times are changing. And I have had a number of trainings where one of those common questions that I've asked is this, that how many of you here have sat with your father and talked about money, or talked about relationships, talked about business, talked about career? And sometimes I had a platform of 100 people and there were only 2 hands. And then I asked how many of you here have been beaten by their fathers. There were more than 50 hands. And so part of the realization was that fathers try their best to provide, yes, but they tend to only show up when they have to discipline. And we all know that if somebody shows up to discipline you, it's very difficult to learn from them. But if the person is a part of your journey on a more regular basis, it becomes easy. So I think the feeling for me around West Nile is that there's so much to be done. I don't know how many fathers can say they have talked to their children about sexuality, that they have talked about business, they have talked about money, they have talked about relationships, that when your time comes to get to start a relationship, these are things that you need to look out for. These are questions you need to ask the person that you want to date. And so somehow I would say in West Nile we are general hustlers, So you just learn here and there, and a number of people get married, and then it's very depressing to learn lessons and you can't use them now anymore, you see. And someone has learned but is married, and so he's hoping maybe, if this thing would just break apart, then I start again. So I think that there's a lot of work to do.
A lot of work to be done. And usually one thing I face as a beautiful challenge on this very show is when I step out there, people tell me, how do you guessed The guest was speaking a lot of sense, but when I say they should participate, they literally pulled back. They enjoy just listening in to the discussion. What I'm saying is that I'll be very glad to pick your questions, especially if you're a boy child on the SMS line of 0393-273-25. So that will be coming up in the next hour. And all the boys and their peers, you have to pull very closer to the radio. We'll take a brief break, just a couple of songs. When we return, we will typically be getting into